On behalf of all the rest of us who are from here in Texas, welcome those of you who are not so fortunate to live here. We want to welcome AAPS also to our great state. And here in Texas, we really do cherish our freedom. You're going to hear from a number of people about their personal experience. I can tell you I've been insurance-free now or I should say out of network for about 14 years, and I have been Medicare-free for 3.5 years. But I'm going to issue kind of a challenge today, talk about this from the standpoint of why, not so much how, but why this is an important issue. I'm going to suggest I have no conflicts of interest. The only thing, like I said, I have a few books out there if anybody's interested. But these opinions that I'm going to talk about are my own and not necessarily reflective of the AAPS or any other organization. Let me have a show of hands. How many of you are satisfied or happy with your career in medicine? Good, most of you. The question is then, would you do it again? If you had it to do all over again, would you do it again? That's great. I think part of that is the spirit of the individuals that are likely to be attending organizational meetings like this are going to be more likely to be pursuing a part of their being is part of being happy and trying to pursue that in their practice. Why did we get why'd you become a physician? I think that's an important question we should all ask ourselves. Is it because somebody in your family was convincing you it was the right thing to do, or tradition? Your dad was a doctor, your mom was a doctor, etc. Did you look at it as a monetary reward? Probably not. If you did, you were delusional. How about the prestigious status of being a physician? Or maybe it was just an academic challenge. This one is the one that bothers me, is when people say, oh, I did it because of job security. This was actually the #1 answer on a survey done of medical students coming in about 10 years ago. Job security. That's a whole nother topic for another lecture, the difference between a job and a profession. We are professionals, or at least that's the way I was taught, and I think job security has little to do with it. I believe that what we have is a calling. If you're not called to this profession, it's too dang hard to do otherwise. You'll find too many reasons to opt out, not of insurance or Medicare, but opt out of the profession entirely because it's too difficult. But if you're called to it, there's little else that you can do. I'm a general surgeon, as was mentioned, but we're all medical minions. All of us kind of have this similarity about us, and it's what makes us the same is actually what makes us different in our society. When I say difference, I'm talking about the medical profession. What's different about it? Largely, it is based on the traditions that have been millennia in development. Traditions like professional integrity and patient-physician relationships. We talk about a lot of that. That's unique to the medical profession. We have a sense of mutual trust between us and our patients. If we don't, we should have. And mutual respect for one another and our individual needs and requirements. And there's also this sense of mutual responsibility. If you're in an independent practice, you have a responsibility to the patients, and it's part of the patient's responsibility back to you. This idea of entitlement of people, this was mentioned earlier about people not wanting to pay even their copay. That is antithesis of what our professional ethic should be about. And that last word, medical ethics, is something that is not discussed a lot. What do we mean by medical ethics? This guy, I started to paint him yellow so that he would look like one of the minions, but Hippocrates, was long prior to that, 2,500 years ago, and he laid out, basically it was his students that ultimately laid out the core principles that Hippocrates taught, and that was do no harm, as we all know. First of all, do your best for the patient, consider patient before yourself, and create no mischief. I'm afraid that some of what I'm going to be talking about is creating some mischief among this organization. And then keep confidential what you see and hear. That all sounds great. There's nothing in the Hippocratic Oath that talks about reimbursement, payment, or anything like that. What it says is, if you keep this oath, it will be granted to you to enjoy your life and to practice this art respected by all men in all times. I think that's going away. And the reason why it's going away is because we're not following those core principles up at the top. And I'll try and give you some ideas as to why I think that is. The Code of Medical Ethics, what we consider the Code of Medical Ethics in this country, was actually established as one of the very first things, the first orders of business by the AMA when it was first initiated back in 1847 in Philadelphia. And they established a written code based on the publication previously by a British physician by the name of Thomas Percival in 1803. So there's a lot of history behind this. That AMA code was then subsequently modified multiple times, major modifications. It continues to be modified little bits at a time, but the major modifications are the dates that I listed here, in particular the one in 1957, where the AMA listed 10 core principles of medical ethics. And I'm only going to talk about 2 of them. Number 6 said, we should avoid conditions which might interfere with the free and complete exercise of the physician's medical judgment. I emphasize the word judgment there because in today's world, we're now being told judgment is to be cast aside in favor of protocols and in favor of specific recipes for medical care. Then number 7, the one right after that, says we should neither pay for nor receive a commission for referral of any patient. This is the fee-splitting type of issue that has been long discussed throughout medical ethics. But it also talks about the fact that we should really only be getting paid for the work that we do specifically. And unfortunately, the way medicine has evolved, many physicians are being lured into situations where they're being paid for either not providing care or providing care that is someone else's responsibility. In more recent changes, I warp the Code of Medical Ethics on purpose here because that's, I think, exactly what has been happening in more recent years. In 2001, the AMA came out with their first support of universal care access, universal access to care. Now, prior to that, there was no mention of everyone had a right to health care. So this is a relatively recent development. And then in 2011, just 5 years ago, they came out with this policy that said physicians must be held responsible for being stewards of the public's resources. And therein lies part of our issue where we're being coerced into making changes in the way we practice based on what the society wants to spend money on, not what our individual patients may or may not need. And today there's an ongoing effort. There's a whole section, there's a long-standing section in the AMA, the Council on Ethical and Judicial Affairs, and they're continuing to alter the code. I have actually authored a short story, which there's a little handout in your packet that talks about this. It's only available on Kindle. I wish I could give it away, but Kindle will only allow it to be sold at 99 cents. So that's the minimum if you were interested either. And basically what it is, it's a fictional account of what is happening to the Code of Medical Ethics, but I think it pretty well reflects much of what I know to be the case. I was a delegate to the AMA for a 4-year period of time, and it's astounding what has been happening at those meetings. And basically what it is the code does not, our current code doesn't really allow for us to ethically ration care. But if you change the code and make it to where it's more about the society's expenses and being stewards of their resources, now all of a sudden you become more acceptable from an ethical standard. The guise that is being used, you've already seen all of this, risk sharing, gain sharing, accountable care organizations, et cetera, pay for performance. These were all outlined earlier. And of course, macro, MIPS, and APMs. Dr. Huntoon We gave you a very extensive description of those earlier, and I won't carry that any further. The question then becomes, is it possible for us to reconcile third-party payment of any sort with traditional Hippocratic ideals? And this is the real question I think every individual has to ask themselves. Well, first, do no harm. That seems easy enough. It doesn't matter who's paying me. I'm not going to harm the patient, right? But always doing what's best for the patient when the insurance company or Medicare or somebody else tells you otherwise, your judgment is not acceptable. These are things that I think are really in danger of being violated. Considering patient before self, that's a pretty self-evident issue, but creating no mischief, again, I told you I'm kind of creating some mischief up here even talking about this whole idea of medical ethics, because it's not something that people want to discuss. They want to discuss the economics, but not how the ethics may be in question. And keeping confidential what you see and hear, that sounds great. We have a whole new law system, HIPAA regulations and everything, and yet the insurance company can step in at any time they want and access your records, as can the government. Who are you protecting the information from? From the patient? From your referring doctors? Or giving full access basically to the people who pay the bills? And it's one of those old sayings, whoever has the gold makes the rules, and that's basically what's happened. So what does third-party payment have to do with ethics? In my opinion, it has everything to do with it. And I would suggest that this is the reason why we should all consider opting out, becoming insurance-free, so that we can actually work for our patients. The rewards of this profession are becoming increasingly harder and harder to obtain. And for physicians, we all become frustrated, angry, all the things that you've talked about, the burnout issues. They're a result of this lack of a core principle on which we can stand. We potentially become compromised. And many of you may have seen this cartoon previously. I had it drawn up for me in 2009. This is Joe the patient and the doctor, and what are they doing? They're in the doctor's office, and they're both shooting up. They're addicts. They're addicted to third-party payment. And I would suggest that almost every one of us has felt that way at some point in time. Ultimately, it leads to an ethical dilemma, though, and that ethical dilemma is, who do we serve? Do we serve the patient, or do we serve whoever is writing the check? This is the full cartoon, and it includes two other characters. One is the insurance company, who's got his money in his hand, and he's got the syringes in every pocket. He's addicted us, and now the government comes along, taps him on the shoulder, and says, "I'll take over from here." We have basically fallen into their trap. Nancy Reagan once famously quoted, "What do you do about drug addiction? Just say no." When are we going to say no? When are we going to pull the needle out of our own arm? Because we can't very well expect the patients to pull the needle out of their arm if we continue to be addicted ourselves. I want the freedom to practice. I want to be independent. I want to be able to do the best job. That's what all of us feel, okay? So here's our excitement. We're ready to do this. And I'm going to follow through my calling. I'm going to do all the things that we've been talking about. I'm going to get third-party free. Well, own my own hours, own my own fees, etc. Control my life. That's what I'd really like to be able to do. But, hey, can I even make a living at this? Well, we've heard some people suggest that they've done quite well with it. I will tell you, in general surgery, it's a very, very challenging situation. I would not recommend to anybody that they do what I did, that is all at once, just pull the plug. Hard to do, because maybe you can make it and maybe you can't. I've been very successful largely because I've found my niche, and I have an investment in my hospital and other sorts of revenue streams, but it isn't about the money. Being out of network and opting out is a lonely proposition, especially if you're a specialist and you're relying on those referrals, because patients will leave and your colleagues will treat you as an outcast, And you'll have to tighten your belt, but ultimately if you were able to do that, you to develop some type of niche in your practice. And I'm going to reiterate something that was said earlier today too, and that niche is really a niche of service. Because if you talk to patients, they're generally mad about one thing in medicine, and that is, my doctor doesn't listen to me. Nobody ever returns my phone calls. The first question that I'm asked when I call the doctor's office, can I make an appointment? What kind of insurance do you have? Those are not questions that have anything to do with medicine. They have to do with the insurance and the third-party process. So, why don't we all do this at one time? Let's do it together. Yeah, right. It's because we are basically insecure. We're risk-averse as a group. We're conformists. If so-and-so is signed up with insurance X, we got to sign up with insurance X too, otherwise we'll be left out. We're apathetic. We can't win, so why even try? This is the one that I hear all the time. I'm just too busy. I couldn't possibly do that. I'm too busy. The younger kids that are just coming out of residency and training, they're brainwashed. They're basically uninformed. They don't know that there is an opportunity for anything. We've heard that discussed already today. And some are already employed, and they feel trapped. They feel as though that there's no way out. I call that the battered wives syndrome, okay? We're in a horrible situation, but man, it's probably not as bad as what we don't know. The enemy we know is not as bad as the enemy that we don't know, and I think that's a false assessment. We're also looking for leaders. We're a bunch of sheep. We want somebody to tell us what to do. Well, what are our leaders doing at this point? They're not doing much. And in fact, I'm going to show you something. This showed up in the General Surgery News. I won't ask you to read that because I'm going to show you a little closer. General Surgery News, May 13th. That's 1 week ago today. This came across, and this is in the op-ed section. A hospital is a factory and physicians as assembly line workers. This was by Arthur Gale, and he was quoting this Dr. David Yu, who is an MD, MBA, medical director of the Adult Patient Medicine Services at Presbyterian Hospital in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And what this Dr. Yu said is, we see the hospital as a factory and our hospitalist group as an assembly line that is in the business of manufacturing perfect discharges. Not outcomes, but discharges. Why? Because that's how they get paid. It has nothing to do with patient care. So this is our leadership is leading us right down this same path. So, is the third-party payment system really affecting your own personal ethics? I'm not going to answer that question for you. I think it's one you have to ask yourself. But that's the gist of what I'm proposing, is that if we look at this from an ethical standpoint, there's a good reason to opt out of all of the third-party payment processes. But I'm going to give you a warning, and that is, if you choose to pursue this third-party free practice, be prepared to have a lot more spare time on your hands. Now, that means that you can play golf, or you can go on a vacation somewhere if you can afford it, and or you can do what I've done, start writing novels. At any rate, there's plenty of opportunity out there, and AAPS clearly is an organization that is in support of these efforts, and they have a lot of very useful tools on their website, as well as the expertise of the individuals that you have already heard from, and more you will hear from later in this day. I thank you and thank AAPS for opportunity, and with that, I would wish you good luck.